This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 293 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. It's about citizen science for travellers. Let me firstly pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, where I'm recording this podcast on this beautiful late spring day. The sun is shining and pretty appropriately, since we are talking about citizen science and a lot of wildlife in today's episode, the birds are singing. I hope they're not too noisy on the recording. So we'll hear from three different people involved in citizen science and travel in various ways. I'll leave it to them to define citizen science appropriately, but just to start off with my own preamble, I have not yet been involved in any kind of citizen science, data collection or research or anything on my travels, but am super keen to kind of much more intentionally seek it out in the future. But I also wanted to just share a little interesting tidbit that I got in my email inbox recently. So I learned that wildlife and fauna and flora researchers are concerned because they need more photographic evidence that is often provided by citizen science of spottings in the wild, not so much of animals, but of plants. Apparently, there are still 4,000 Australian plant species that have not been properly photographed in the wild, which is, problematic. In the headline says, may lead to their extinction, which is, dramatic, but possibly true. But what interested me particularly about it, they were talking about the iNaturalist app, which several of my guests will refer to today. But the problem was that people are less likely to take photographs of flora which are less charismatic than other flora. So if you come across a plant with a beautiful, really standout flower, everyone takes a picture, wants to upload it to iNaturalist. But the less charismatic flowers are missing out. So that's my goal now. I'm going to be seeking out these charisma-free plants, poor things. So let's get on to my guests today. I have three fabulous guests, and the first one is Roger Smith. Roger runs Echidna Walkabout, which is a company running mostly wildlife tours around Australia. And he's been doing it for many years, as he'll mention, and gives us a great overview of citizen science with a particular project related to koalas, which I found especially intriguing.
Citizen science is it's an interesting topic, and it's been used at different times. People have thought about citizen science and tried to include it in all sorts of different things, but these days it's becoming more and more important possibly because there's less and less money going to universities. And also, I think one of the great things that's happened is that we now have online tools that make it available to everybody. A typical example is eBird, which allows people from all over the world to log the bird sightings that they have at specific locations. I highly recommend that anybody who is a bird watcher gets onto it, although I must admit that I'm terrible at it. But regardless of that, it is a very, very useful resource. There's other online tools as well, like iNaturalist, which I'm doing more and more. My partner, Janine, is a great advocate for both of these tools, and she started this. She was the one who really got this going. But in doing these things, as citizens, people, anybody can actually provide information that can be found by anyone at any time. And more these days, scientists are using these platforms to help them understand what's going on. And it's particularly relevant to tourism, particularly tour operators who are operating every day. Like up until not so long ago, we were operating a day tour out into the bush near Melbourne, and we were sighting koalas. And Janine started a project many years ago to try and help us understand what was going on with koalas. Each time we went there, we not only did we record the koalas, we started to employ koala researchers, citizen science researchers who work for us, and they went out to look for the koalas, located them and told the tour guide where they were. And suddenly the people were becoming involved in a citizen science project. We also got them involved in doing a number of other things in the area that we operated in, which actually helped conserve koalas. But there's other parts of citizen science, apart from logging these things. It's also, and I'm talking about this in particular to do with tourism, obviously. It enables an operator like us to help people to understand the environment that they're in, that our guests are in, and to appreciate more about it. It's amazing how many people travel and then suddenly find themselves in an environment that they've never been in before, and that maybe they've seen a lot of on TV, like, for instance, on a David Attenborough show or whatever, and suddenly there they are in reality. And as a guide, I might say to people looking at koalas on a very dry, hot day, that koala is having to live today in 40-degree heat, and during winter it's going to be there at -5 degrees or, very cold. No one's helping it. It's got to be cared for, looked after by whatever it finds around it. And it's funny, you get a group of people standing there and they suddenly think, because I say to them, just imagine you were that koala. And we say to them, you need to help us understand them better. And to cut a long story short, through that citizen science program to do with particularly our koalas, we started up the Koala Clancy Foundation, and that's our not-for-profit. It's still carrying on its work to this day. But one of the things that the foundation discovered through the research that I've just been talking about, is that koalas were declining. And there was a very obvious reason for it, but that was caused by climate change and heating of the planet and a number of other factors, but that was the primary one. We did just briefly discover something else too, is that a weed that grows there impeded their movement through the bush. And so we got people pulling these weeds out. And I'm not talking about a little thing a couple of centimetres high. I'm talking about something that grows 1 metre or 1.5 metres high. And it's like a koala being placed in prison, which means that it can't find a mate. And if it can't find a mate, they don't mate and they don't have babies and all the stuff that goes with that. That and a whole range of other things helped Janine and our organisation to realise that it was really important that we did more about it. So citizen science might start small, but it can get bigger and bigger and bigger.
The example with finding that weed is such a good example of a really important outcome. I'm curious, when you have taken tours and engaged your tour participants in citizen science, are they the kind of people who were already ready to do it, or have you, or do you mostly find people are introduced to it for the first time, or how do they feel about kind of participating in that?
Most of our guests are from overseas or were from overseas. COVID had a big impact on that, but most of our guests come here generally on a generalised tour. They like the idea of seeing Australian wildlife. That's one of the main reasons people come to Australia. We do try and get that message across through the industry. And as this is a sort of a travel podcast, I would love to say to the industry, anyone who's listening to this, please let your guests know in advance what they're going to be involved in, because they are excited once they find out that they're actually involved in it. And what we also found as we went on through the years, and we've been operating for 30 years, is that people often chose our tour because it had a content in it which meant that they could give back. And that's really important. To answer your question, some people were not aware of what they were going to be involved in. And they, pulling weeds, I'm meant to be here to have fun and enjoy myself. Well, this is fun. Let's get in and pull a few weeds. Don't worry, you won't hurt yourself.
And you're really helping the koalas.
But on others, like for instance, extended tours, we do a lot of work for Australian Geographic Travel, and we are doing more and more work with Australians. And it's always difficult to help them understand that they are actually doing something, And if they're recording something, whatever it might be, suddenly something pops up that we haven't seen before. We were over in Exmouth just recently, and suddenly we found a seabird that hadn't been seen there before. And whoosh, people got photographs of it, and then we asked experts to help us identify that particular bird. And it was fantastic. And to this day, it could be one of two different possibilities. But anyway, exciting things come out of this, and people sometimes know what they're doing. Often they don't. And sometimes when they do know, they don't realise how much they can be involved and how much they can give back by being involved.
It's exciting to hear from a guest like Roger, who has seen the benefits of citizen science over many years. Lots of food for thought there. My next guest is Jamie Van Jones from Salt and Bush Ecotours, just a little bit south of Perth here, in an area that's actually really special to me, the site of where we spent most of our weekends and school holidays when I was growing up, south of Mandurah. Anyway, Jamie, in her tours and other work, is a massive advocate for citizen science, and I got her to give us some information and an example as well.
But citizen science for me is about how anyone can engage in collecting information and data that scientists can use for research. And so it can cover any topic, and it's just about finding the projects that are out there or creating a project with a scientist. So at Salt and Bush Ecotours, we decided from the very beginning that citizen science needed to be a part of all of our tours. And we change that depending on how interested guests are in citizen science, but we always inform them about what it is and how they can be involved very easily. One is our nocturnal wildlife walks. So we take people on tour at night in the Australian bush, and we have an incredible possum that lives near us called the Western ringtail possum. It's critically endangered. And this little possum only weighs 1 kilo, and it has little tiny round ears. It literally looks like a teddy bear that lives in the trees. And they're very quiet and timid. And the whole reason why they're endangered is they just don't defend themselves. So they just stay put if they're being attacked. And even when we're looking at them, they just stay still. So they're incredible to see, but we know that potentially by 2040 that these ringtail possums could be extinct. And that's a scary thought for us. But what we do on our tours is we record possums on the walks that we do. And we pass that information on to researchers at the Department of Parks and Wildlife, but also called the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions. And what that does is allow them to just know that the population, at least in the areas where we're operating at, is, if we see a decline, it will come up in the numbers that we're recording. And so as we're going on our nocturnal wildlife walks, we have a clipboard and a piece of paper. We all wear head torches, and we also use night vision binoculars so that we don't impact the possum's eyes when we're looking at them. So we'll spotlight them with the head torches, and then when we see it, we turn them off. We keep one red light on so that we can fill out the data form, and everyone gets a look through the night vision binoculars. But we record where the possum is, so the GPS location. We also record whether we can tell if it's a male or a female, whether it's a mother with an infant in its pouch or beside it, and also what tree it's in. And if we're seeing it eating, what it's eating. So we record all that information, and then we pass that on. And so that's a really exciting, that's something that's really easy for us to do, and anyone can get involved in if they do a nocturnal wildlife walk in the southwest. So from about Doorsville Cut in Mandurah, that's basically the range of where the northern range of where these possums go.
I have seen those possums myself at my dad's place down near the Doorsville Cut, so especially meaningful story to me. Jamie has heaps more to say, but I'm saving her extra story from this topic about a fairy tern, the bird conservation story, for a future episode because it's fabulous. So yeah, we'll hear a lot more from Jamie in some future episodes. My next and final guest today is Justin Meneguzzi, and he is a travel writer. That's important for the context of this story, and especially after our recent episode on Antarctica when I chatted with Justin about his recent trip down there, and we talked about, should we or should we not travel to Antarctica. This Justin has too many Justins. This Justin had put a lot of thought into whether to go or not, and reflects on this with me in the light especially of their science and their citizen science program.
really early last year in, I guess, April or May, I got an invite from Viking Cruises, who run expedition cruises around the world, but more recently in Antarctica. And they had launched a new ship recently, and they invited me on their first cruise to Antarctica down there. And as a writer and a photographer who has also traveled to the Arctic, Antarctica has always been on my bucket list in a really big way. It just has such a strong association with exploration and adventure, and I guess kind of ruggedness that we all kind of associate with it. So I was really keen to do it, but at the same time, I'm very kind of conscious about, I guess, my own carbon footprint when I travel. And traveling from Australia, I'm based in Melbourne, to traveling from my home to the port in not in Buenos Aires, in the very bottom of Argentina, actually, it's something like 3 or 4 flights. So it's a long way to go. And then, there's a lot of headlines at the moment about the ice caps in Antarctica are melting, and there's a real question mark around how tourism is potentially contributing to that acceleration of meltwater. And there's a real ethical dilemma around, should we even be traveling there at all? So when I got these invites, as excited as I was, I really needed to kind of sit down and think about the ethical ramifications of going there. And for me personally, what kind of justified the trip was Viking's commitment to their science program. And so that's something that was kind of really theoretical. When you're seeing that in the press release or seeing it on a website, a lot of companies can make kind of claims about stuff. Well, when I got to Ushuaia, which is the port at the bottom of Argentina, we got on the ship. The ship was absolutely spectacular, very, very cozy, very Scandi. But as we kind of settled in and we had our kind of induction with the crew and that kind of stuff, we met the chief science officer on the ship. And every single day, well, I guess the introduction to the program was very detailed in terms of, I guess they had 2 programs going at once. So they had a higher level, more professional scientific program running on board. And that was things like deploying underwater drones to monitor the seabed.
Oh, wow.
They have what's called a ferry box on the ship as well. And so as the ship's cruising along, it's gathering water from the ocean and it's collecting data. It's analyzing the data as it's flowing through the ferry box and collecting information. So that's really that's really highbrow, top science stuff that's been done in association with lots of universities around the world, including the University of Western Australia, where you're from.
Lovely.
Yeah. So they're doing lots of really cool stuff, but, that's great, but how do I get involved as a traveller? And so I guess running alongside that program, Viking had a citizen science program on board as well. And they kind of ranged from things that you could do in your own time on the ship as you're enjoying the cruise to actual programs that you kind of need to register your interest in and participate in. So to give you an example of that, there's an app called iNaturalist, and as people are standing out on the deck and they might spot whales or penguins or, what have you, they can kind of record that in the app as well. They have that kind of, I guess you'd say, more passive kind of citizen science where you can kind of do it at your own time. You don't need an expert with you. But I guess what was really exciting was they had a more involved project, which is called the Fjord Fido Project. And the Fjord Fido Project had been around for a little while now, and essentially what it's doing is looking at the impact of glacial meltwater on the ocean around Antarctica and also more generally. So as I mentioned before, the ice in Antarctica is melting at an accelerated rate, but we don't know what that means for the flora and fauna that live in the ocean itself. And one of the, plants or animals that are really kind of important for the global food chain is phytoplankton. So phytoplankton are really, really tiny, microscopic little plants that float around in the ocean, and they feed everything from krill right up to humpback whales. So they're a really critical part of the food chain and our ecosystem, but we don't know as the glaciers are melting and that's changing the temperature of the water, we don't know what impact that's having on phytoplankton. And so it's important for researchers to know or answer that question, really, which is really exciting because we can get involved with that. So with Viking, I got up early one morning. I think it was like 6 a.m., 0 degrees outside. The conditions were just right. So we got in our big black rubber ducky, or Zodiac, some people know it as, and we shot out onto the ocean. And it's a really special time to be out on the water because you kind of got the whole thing to yourself. The other boats haven't launched yet. There's still that soft morning light. You can kind of see mountains and glaciers and stuff on the horizon. So it's really special. And so it was about 10 of us in the Zodiac, and one of the scientists on the ship who accompanied us. And essentially what we were doing is we were measuring water clarity using what's called a Secchi disc, which is a black and white disc that you drop into the water until basically you can't see it anymore, and then you just record that depth. They were also measuring ocean temperature and salinity and that kind of stuff. So once we gathered that initial kind of data around clarity, temperature, salinity, what we do is we drag a long kind of net about, I guess, the length of a tennis racket to use a random measure of length.
I can picture it.
Yeah. So we drag that in the water, and what we're trying to do is drag up phytoplankton into the net, which we then we pump through a muslin cloth the same way that you would cheese. We have a little pump, and we pump that in till all the ocean water's gone, and we're kind of left with a I guess it just looks like a brown residue. Like you wouldn't think much of it. It just looks like grime, basically. And that was it. So we kind of collected our data, went back to the ship. But then what was really exciting is that afterwards, when we were back on board, we went to the lab. So Viking has a massive 380 square foot lab on the ship that does both wet and dry research. So they got that lab where they store the samples, but then they've also got a kind of more central area where all the scientists kind of loiter. They don't loiter. They're more active than loitering. But they're kind of there, and you can go and you can ask questions. There's very detailed maps and infographics and screens showing everything about the voyage and the information they're getting. So we had a special session with our scientist, and she had actually put the phytoplankton that we gathered under a microscope. And we could see it. And it was really cool because you can't think, microscopic plants, maybe they just look like little bits of seaweed or, I don't know, like herbs, like the little herb emoji that you might get on your phone. But it actually looks like a galaxy. They look, it's like glass shards, yellow glass shards, pointy, sharp, but they just look like stars and just really, really special. And you think, okay, that's all phytoplankton. But then there's a book that they brought out and it showed you actually within phytoplankton there's all these specific types of phytoplankton that have different roles and different characteristics associated with them. So after we get the sample, we send it back to a university in Argentina, and it's actually stored, and it's stored there, but they also use it for more analysis. So the Fjord Phyto project is really exciting because it's a project I can be involved with, but it's also in collaboration with some really great institutions like the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, NASA, and the Argentine university that I mentioned. So it's cool to be able to contribute in some little way. I feel like it's really important that we're going to these places where we're having a detrimental impact on the environment, that we are giving back in some kind of way. And in Antarctica, it's very difficult to do that. It's not like you're going to a community stay in Thailand or Bali or something like that. There's no community, there's no culture there that you can kind of give back to in some monetary way. So the way we do that in Antarctica is through research, and knowing that the scientists will use that research hopefully to help guide future policy, I think is a really valuable outcome.
Like all of my guests talking about citizen science, Justin had much more to say as well, and we did talk some more about other science projects they were undertaking, published academic research papers connected to his particular journey and more, and about how the tourist dollar does really help to fund this scientific research. So I found that all super interesting. Thank you, Justin. Well, that is it for episode 293 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. I hope you've found it as interesting as I have to learn more about citizen science on our travels, I will definitely be seeking out more opportunities to do that for sure. A big thanks to our 3 guests. So thank you to Roger Smith of Echidna Walkabout. You can find out more about his work there at echidnawalkabout.com.au. And he mentioned their not-for-profit, the Koala Clancy Foundation, and you can read more about that at koalaclancyfoundation.org.au. Likewise, a huge thanks to Jamie Van Jones. You can find out about their tours in the southwest of Western Australia at their website saltandbush.com.au. And their not-for-profit as well is swanlandia.com.au, which Jamie will tell us some more about in a future episode. And lastly, but definitely not least, thank you to Justin Meneguzzi, and you can find out more about him, his writing, and his interest in conservation as well at justinmeneguzzi.com. Now, all of my guests, whether I included it in our edited section or not, talked a lot about the various apps that we can use these days to take part ourselves in citizen science, even at home, whether we're travelling or not. So I have a list of 4 that I'm including in the show notes that were widely recommended. One is eBird, which is in conjunction with Cornell University. In all of these cases, you can just look for the apps in your app store. Then there is iNaturalist, iNaturalist.org, which is a joint initiative between the California Academy of Sciences and National Geographic, and Quest-A-Game, which Jamie mentioned, questagame.com, which kind of gamifies citizen science, I guess. Sorry, I think I said there were 4, but there's 3. So there you go. There's tons more, but let's start with those. All of these links, plus links for our Facebook and LinkedIn groups for thoughtful travellers, will be in the show notes. And for this episode, the show notes are at notaballerina.com/293. Do come over to our groups and let us know if you've taken part in any citizen science projects on your travels. I would love to hear more fabulous examples. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.